Okay, it says you are live. So yeah, we just wanted to the cousins wanted to get together and talk about the post-election period, election post-election. And before we get into that, just wanted to acknowledge some sad news that we got today, which is that our Aunt Seal passed away this morning after a long illness, a long Alzheimer's, I think it might have been. But she was over 100 years old, I believe. Does anyone know exactly how old she was?
101.
100,
Mom said.
101, I
101?
think.
Okay, okay. So she was
Close to
my
102, though.
okay. She was our dad's one of his siblings, the last living sibling. Um, and I did the math today. I think our dad would have been 97 now, so she was, I guess, about 5 years older, 4 or 5 years older than him. So, yep, just wanted to acknowledge that. We're gonna really miss her and rest in peace,
Amen.
Aunt Seal. So, yeah, anyway, we thought we would just, with all this craziness going on, we thought it'd be good to get together and talk and try not to debate or argue too much. But if it happens, that's fine too. We'll keep it respectful. But we thought a good way to start would be to um, talk about each of our priorities when it comes to voting. Because for me, I really think my kind of rule is don't criticize the voter. Go ahead and criticize the politicians or the candidates all you want. They're fair game, but I try not to criticize voters. So this person doesn't know how to vote, that kind of thing, because I realize that everyone has such different priorities, and a lot of times when we decide who to vote for, it's based on we might have 10 or 20 different priorities all ranked differently, and my number 10 might be someone else's number 1 or might not even be on their radar or etc. So I think it's more interesting to find out what someone's priorities are, and then kind of take it from there. So for me, especially in this election, my main priority was like rule of law, constitution, peaceful transfer of power, um, which I think is one of the most incredible things about our government is when this started back in 1776, it was 87 maybe, I guess. um
248 years ago since
yeah.
Declaration. And
Yep. And the new thing was that there was going to be a peaceful transfer of power. One leader would step down and another one would come in, and that's just the way it was going to work. And a lot of people thought that couldn't work, but it turned out to be that it did for hundreds of years. And what really concerned me most about this election was I was really turned off during the last election when President Trump, did not accept the results. And it wasn't so much January 6th, but it was, probably even more was the lead up to that when he was trying to, what I felt, circumvent the Constitution, circumvent the peaceful transfer of power. Um, so that was one big motivating factor for me. But on the other side, I was very concerned about a lot of things on the Democrat side. For example, well, I guess mainly it would be kind of the identity politics angle of it, and the putting so much uh, importance on people's characteristics, ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation, things like that. I don't like the way that's going. It's very concerning to me, especially with my family, biracial, interracial family. I don't want my sons treated any differently that means I don't want them treated better or worse than anyone else. That's one thing that has really concerned me about the Democrats for the past several years. So those were kind of my two competing priorities in this election. So that's where I'm coming from. But anyone else want to jump in?
Mikey, you go ahead.
Well, I mean, you and Kevin know my view of policy hasn't changed in 30 years. It's what economic program is going to create the most revenue and create the most prosperity for the most people. I've been a supply sider on economic theory for a long time, back to college. And when I, look at how to create opportunity, how to deal with issues that we can't tax our way out of, such as Medicaid and Social Security, which are coming up rapidly to a point where they're not going to be fungible. And I don't know how we're going to fund it if we don't look at a combination of saving dollars somewhere and constantly creating revenue streams. And it's complicated in the sense that we keep creating bigger and bigger revenue streams every year, but we spend more and more every year. And we're going to have to pay the piper here relatively soon. Or I feel the generation that I'm in is going to be the one picking up the tab for those programs that no one wants to see go away. So I've been pretty consistent on, places I've lived. I've lived in, 3 different states. I've worked in many others of what's going to help the most. And I've always believed a supply side theory in economics, as long as you can control the inflationary side of it, tends to provide more opportunities for more people. And, this cycle with where inflation was and not seeing logical changes that I think can lower inflation is, concerning to me. Instead of going green over time, we decided to go green too rapidly, which Europe probably found out before we did. Europe kind of slowed that train a little bit. We did not. So how do you do that and not create inflation as you're creating new markets? So, when I look at this, when it was Biden and Trump, did I have a really good option? No. Did I like Trump's personality? Absolutely not. Did I think Biden was capable of running the country? It seemed clear to me after about 2 years that there was something wrong. And so I had massive concerns about, what team is running the programs as it relates to inflation. And obviously I live in a border state. Immigration is a gigantic issue here, has been for years, but the last couple of years has been different than what it was previously, where it was manageable through NGOs and some government agencies to kind of handle some of that influx. It became unsustainable in some of the local communities on our border, where they didn't have hospital beds, they didn't have places to put people. So that was a big challenge I saw this cycle. But, I've always looked at it, and Dan, this, we've had these conversations for years about how do you create an economic policy that will really help as many people as possible.
All right. So Renee, yeah.
Yeah, I could babble on for a long time, I think. And now, I think that for most of us, not just most of us here, but most people I know, and granted, I don't know hundreds of thousands of people, but the people that I talk to, no matter who they're voting for, we're looking for about the same thing most of the time. Safety for ourselves and our families, decent healthcare options. We want the economic system to, do a great job for everyone. Like Michael said, we don't want to give handouts to people or invite people in that we think are just going to continue to take, and we have to support them. We want good education. So we're about the same on most levels that I can think of. And then there are several outlying factors that make the difference, for people, whether it's the right to choose or, the national debt is way too high and we need to, take that down or whatever it is. But so I tend to go along the lines of the social, emotional side of the nation, I guess. I don't know as much about, the finances that some people do, and, the spending for war or getting into wars, period. I don't know. This one, the last few elections have felt much more tense. I could feel it, throughout my city, throughout, my workplace when I was working. And I don't know if that's because of the age that I am now, that now I'm understanding it more. And, so I can look at it from a different side, or if truly there's just so much pent up anger and frustration among people that, we're hitting a tipping point. And yet I don't see that personally. I mean, I get into, discussions with friends or neighbors that might get a little bit heated, and we usually back right down to, but hey, in the end, we want, the best for our kids. We want the best for our families. We're going to try to make it work no matter what. So I have been fortunate in that I'm not in a situation where I've got people, coming at me from different angles. I'm very fortunate. So it's hard for me to keep perspective on everything else. And when I'm watching, any kind of TV or listening to media, which I try to take with a grain of salt, anymore anyway, I just see so much hype and anger and frustration, and that's very, very concerning to me. So where to go from here? Here I am, like I say to people, okay, what are you going to do today? What are you going to do tomorrow? I mean, I'm here. I'm not leaving. I'm not going anywhere else. I don't think.
You're not going to Canada?
And so I'm pretty sure
Not leaving the country.
I ask myself, okay, what am I going to do today, tomorrow, when I hear all the frustration and the anger and the, I'm going to just keep putting one foot forward and kind of doing the same thing I've been doing, trying to pay attention a little more. So
the grass still needs to be cut. The snow still needs to be shoveled.
I've done that the last 3 days in a row.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wait a minute, the snow needs to be shoveled? What's that?
What's snow?
For me, it was the grass and the leaves, mulching, cutting, mulching some more, cutting some more, mulching some, cutting.
Yeah. All right. So, Kevin, how about you?
Yeah. So kind of to start with, I view myself as an independent. If a party puts forward a candidate that earns my respect, and I believe that they have the country's best interests in mind, that's generally how I'm going to vote. As far as policy goes, I tend to be fiscally conservative and socially liberal. I think that the social policies are in place and need to be there for the people who can't do for themselves. as far as voting in this election cycle, I follow a little bit more along the lines, Danny, with you, that I was watching the vote counting on C-SPAN on January 6th, 2020. And it left me in tears, right? And that's, to me, I watched the speeches that were made out on the lawn ahead of time and was absolutely not surprised that what happened. And that's 100% unforgivable in my book. Now, that has nothing to do with the candidate, who I also believe is unworthy of the office, that from top to bottom, side to side, as a Christian, as someone who is politically minded, as someone who's economically minded, who's socially minded, there is, in my book, virtually nothing that is rewarding or worthy in Donald J. Trump. He's a liar. He's a cheat. He's stolen. He's committed acts, in my mind, against our country. He's not a person I believe should be in office. Now, I was exceedingly happy when Joe Biden stepped aside, because he was not right either. And I think the same age as my mom, or close to it. I think my mom is sharper than he was.
Yep.
Right? I would have voted for her before I voted for him. So was Joe Biden the right answer? No. Was Kamala Harris the right answer? I don't think so either. But I don't think either party has put forward candidates who have been worth their weight in dog shit. Pardon the expression. Danny, you can edit that out later. But if no one is willing to put forward a candidate that's worth voting for, you ultimately have to pick the lesser of two evils. And in this election cycle, one of the candidates had already violated, beyond what I believe is forgivable, the American dream, the American Constitution, the American voting policy, so we're almost 248 years from the Declaration of Independence. So 244 years or 240 years, whatever it was, of peaceful transfer. Unforgivable. Can't get beyond it. And I also don't believe in his policies. I think that his policies are going to take us in an unfortunate direction.
So policies, that's a good segue, I think, because I did want to look at a couple policies. So we talked about a little bit about the economy. We didn't go in depth, but it's no surprise that at least two of us mentioned the economy or economic issues as one of the main priorities, because according to the exit polls, it was the economy and the border that were probably the two top issues for most voters, or the plurality of voters. So, and Michael, you mentioned that you live in Arizona, border state, of course. So I've got a question. I don't know a lot about the whole border issue, immigration and so on. And I'm hoping one of you maybe can answer this question. But so we had a border or an immigration bill, I believe, a couple years ago that the Republicans did not.
It was bipartisan. It was
Well,
proposed
it's
under a
got to be.
bipartisan agreement.
But let's not throw two people in and say it's bipartisan. That's where you got to be careful on this.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
did it have a
Let's also not split hairs.
majority? Did it have a majority of the minority? Not even close. So the question is, how many people were willing to sign on, Kevin? And in that bill, there was about 5 of them. So when I look at what was in there, Dan,
mhm.
it wasn't stopping the flow that was coming in. It was creating a program to handle the surge in a better way by hiring more immigration judges and some things of that nature that I could agree with. But there were things in there, number one, didn't need a bill to do. Could have easily stopped some of the flow that was already there. So at the end of the day, the difference between the parties, as I've seen here, has been stop the flow first, then we'll fix the other thing. We can't fix the other thing when you have chaos in the system because you have too many people coming in for too many services that we can't provide. There's a moral aspect, and Kevin, you and I talked about this a little bit when you and I were together last time. I see kind of a moral aspect of there's got to be some logical steps to making that flow work. It was difficult in the 1900s. It's difficult now, but we should want to push for where you're not sending people on a wild goose chase into your country where you don't have services, you don't have education, you have nothing set up for them to be able to handle the influx that existed. That's been a problem in our state for a long time, not just with this last wave, which hit Texas, frankly, worse than it hit Arizona, except for Yuma, Arizona. Yuma was overwhelmed. The NGOs were overwhelmed. The hospital was overwhelmed. It's too small of a community to be able to handle that influx. So if the policy was going to be, I'm going to let in 8 million people, I don't know if that was policy, but was what was happening. Somewhere midstream, they should have said to themselves, well, we've got to stop where we're at now so we can deal with the influx that we're dealing with already that we don't have solutions to, which is shoving it down to the states, shoving it down to the municipalities to deal with. And that's really what happened, is the states and municipalities, and everyone did something different, right?
I mean, Mike, if you look at it from a constitutional perspective, that's the responsibility of the states.
The responsibility of the states is not the border, Kevin. Never has been. Border security is a federal program, always has been, always will be. The states are not supposed to be the entity that handles security. So that's been the problem, is each state, and mostly it's been Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona that have dealt with this. The funny thing is California stopped it by getting the wall built in San Diego sector, slowed them down significantly. And that's been going on for about 8 years, Kevin. So different sectors had different needs and different variety of trying to deal with. Some had to pull in the National Guard and use them in a way that they thought they could, mostly in a ministerial positions, not in law enforcement positions. There weren't enough border agents ever. County sheriffs can only do so much. Again, these are, Texas is like Arizona. The counties on the border are very rural. There's not big city. The closest big city in Arizona is Tucson, which is 90 miles north of the Mexican border. That's the closest big city in Arizona. All those other counties, it's either tribal land, which has become a big problem. The tribes have they have their own police force, but they have such huge land mass that a lot of that activity comes through that. But the biggest change, Dan, with that I saw was the drugs. The fentanyl, in the old days, okay, it was marijuana coming across that border. When it started changing to fentanyl, and you started seeing the danger of that coming across, I think for a lot of people in Arizona, that changed the dynamic when that drug was hitting suburban Phoenix, 200 miles away, and kids were getting a hold of that. And obviously that's a nationwide problem, and then the human smuggling aspect is really ugly. Now, we saw that here the last wave, where you'd see people in drop houses, and drop houses would get raided all the time because
What's a
they were.
drop house?
So it's where the coyotes who bring the immigrants in
Okay.
would store a group of immigrants inside a house, sometimes 100 of them in a house in a neighborhood, waiting
Wow.
to move them on from that area to the next place.
Did everyone know, like everyone in the neighborhood, did they know this is a drop house here and just nobody did
Some
anything about it?
instances, some instances, it was very easy to find,
Mhm.
but what you had then is local police and sheriffs having to take care of that. You know, and there was a little more cooperation with ICE, obviously back then, different administration, so ICE was, you know, involved. But that's, you know, the human smuggling aspect of this is been really bad. And what we've done is made the cartels rich because they're moving everyone through, you know, usually $10,000 a head to move them through. And then you got secondary issues you have to deal with. I mean, you've got disease issues that we haven't dealt with in forever. I mean, TB is something that we deal with now that we didn't have to deal with before. And then, you know, you go through that cycle, Dan, and then you have the COVID chaos on top of everything else, right? I mean, I go back to Renee's point about feeling anxious or nervous. It was both sides I was getting that from because, you know, number one, surviving COVID still wasn't through everyone's mind. That added, I think, to a lot of the political angst and the political separation to the far left and the far right. I really think that had, you know, a significant place there because when I look at my friends who, you know, I'm a registered independent now. I was a registered Republican my whole life. Do I lean conservative? Yes, I still lean conservative. My business partner is a registered independent. He was an elected Democrat official for 27 years. And his party's going through the same machinations now that the Republican Party has been going through the last 8 years. Is what are you? What do you want to be? Those hard and fast rules we grew up with in the 80s and 90s about this is how this party is, that's how that party is. I mean, this election probably proved that that's out the window. And what does it look like going forward is going to be, I think, an interesting dynamic. So Latinos voted 9 points higher to Trump this cycle in Arizona. 42% of Latinos voted for Trump. Some of that is the immigration issue and the schooling issue, not having enough places to put people. Some of that are social issues. The Latino populations tend to be, frankly, more conservative than not. But that was a massive swing. 9% is a really big swing in 2 years. And it's interesting because I'd like to get your opinions in your states, but it was obvious to me about 12 months ago the abortion issue was cooling off. And it was cooling off because everyone was doing referendums. The passion that was there 2 years ago was real, and it was serious, and it affected that red wave that Republicans thought they were going to get. That's why they didn't get it, because of that issue. Now this cycle, because of referendums in each state, it had started to cool a little bit. And then the first issue really became, you know, economics and immigration. So from a policy perspective, Kevin, that's, you know, what do we do to change so we're not spending like drunken sailors, because we can't continue to do that. And both parties have been guilty of it. There's no doubt about it. But now you're getting to a point where Social Security goes bankrupt in 2035. That's, in political years, that's right around the corner.
So hang on, before we get into Social Security, I just wanted a couple questions about the border. So, so Kevin, you said that you didn't agree with any of Trump's policies, and
I didn't say any. I didn't say any. But,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, what do you think about his border policy versus the Democrats? And for myself, I will say that I do think you know, the border wasn't one of my top 5 issues, but it was probably one of my top 10. And I do, in that when it comes to border issues, I do agree more with Republicans, and I think so this is what I heard. My understanding is that Trump had a presidential order in place that involved when the illegal immigrants or undocumented, when they were captured, let's say, they were sent back. Whereas, and this, I could have this wrong, so let me know if I've got this wrong. And so that was Trump's presidential order. It wasn't a bill, you know. So those are easily overturned. So my understanding is that when Biden came in, he overturned that, and that then allowed more illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants, whatever term you want to use, allowed them into the country. So,
Dan,
although,
let me add
yeah,
one more piece. The asylum seekers, that was the Remain in Mexico policy, that if you were seeking asylum, you were on the Mexican side of the border, and we worked with the Mexican government on that. So that changed after that order, where it was no longer the Remain in Mexico policy while your asylum case was being heard in the United States to come through. That was another piece to it.
Okay, so Trump had them remaining in Mexico during the asylum period, and Biden overturned that. Okay, and for in your understanding, Michael, does that account for the? Well, first of all, what was the increase in illegal immigration? You said there's been like 8 million. I think. Do you mean 8 million over the past 4 years, 3.5 years?
Yep.
Okay, and what was it before then? Like for the previous 4 years, do you know?
It was, I mean, we were looking at 500,000 a year.
A year, okay. So about 2 million over 4 years. So you're saying about a 4 times increase.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah. Kevin or Renee, any comments?
I guess the one comment that I have that I keep coming back to, regardless of what issue it is that when I'm watching the key players play the game, I'm watching some version of unfair play at different times. You know, saying at one point, "Oh, it's too soon. You know, we can't make this decision right now," or more than likely, "Oh, no, we really can't make that decision right now because it's too soon. It's too close to when we're going to have the next election." Probably you probably are following me here. It had to do with the Supreme Court justices, not just once, but a couple different times. In my political understanding, watching a president several years ago be admonished that he couldn't make a choice for, any Supreme Court justices because it was, no, we don't have enough time. It's too good. The unfairness, that's really probably one of the biggest issues for me. I can deal with people being moderate, being conservative at times, be fair about it. How are you talking with other Congress people? How are you talking to your constituents? How are you bringing to the table issues and then playing fair? I have not seen that, and I keep going back to the fact that, as a parent and as a teacher, and honestly, anybody who's as a manager of a business, as anything, one of the things you want is for your workers to play fair. Like, be upfront, have a discussion, but come to something fair. Don't flip back and forth and then put up blocks for this person because you don't like them and put up. That to me has been, most of the time, I've been able to look at it and say, this is so absurdly elementary that it's almost laughable. And then I remember that they're making decisions about, me and my family. And, I can live with decisions where I need to be taxed more, or I need to be careful and carry a different ID, or, but when I start to watch the absurdity of people who are really acting, again, extremely childish, that just puts me over the edge. And I think, well, good luck to us all. Even those of you that are in the middle of this, displaying your inability to listen and to talk to somebody else and to come to a compromise, because that's what's right today, not, at my 63-year point in life, and I've got, kids and grandkids, and I just think, what can I teach them? I'll continue to teach them, listen, try to be, educated about as much as you can be educated about, try to make the right decision for you, for others. You can't discount other people, listen. That's what I would love to see across the board. And I think it can happen. Mostly, I think it can happen through education and through programs that help people who haven't learned that themselves learn it and then teach it to others. So that goes a little bit to your point, Kevin, about that, the social piece of, my angle has always been in terms of what I can do that's right for the greater good, the greater social good, learning how to play fair, learning that everybody doesn't start, on the same step. So that's for any of these issues, that's going to be what I come back to is, what have I seen? Who am I watching that's playing fair? And again, this goes back to what you're saying, Kevin, Dan, even Michael, that I don't want to see people just making decisions that disregard everything that we've built so far. So.
Yeah. Kevin, what do you think?
So much. So I'm kind of cycling back a little bit to the border. It's broken. There's no doubt about it. The experience that people in Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, and parts of California, I'm sure, can't be understood by those of us who have no land border with another country. We do know that there's a large population of workers who have the potential of not being documented or being here illegally and working here illegally through whatever means necessary. I had a friend who owned a tire and repair shop, and now he would always, if he knew that one of his employees was undocumented, he would start them down the process of getting documented, right? So it was important for him to do that. But there are a lot of people out there. They're stealing Social Security numbers. They're using Social Security numbers to get jobs. It's obviously getting harder because the INS paperwork now on most jobs requires more than just a Social Security number to maintain that job. Some of the policies of the Trump administration had our families faced that when they were coming over from another country, you know, some of our family, the Riney family, well, the Seacott family, both here long before the U.S. was the U.S. But still, you know, had we had to face that, would we not have tried to stay here illegally, given what the American dream is advertising? I know not a lot. I know several people who are here or were here illegally. One of them is trying to get legal. The other one went through the whole process and is now a naturalized citizen. Right? So I don't have answers on the border. The border is a far bigger issue than four of us can really speak to. I think that treating people in a humane way, treating families in a humane way, when they are caught, when they are detained, is, I mean, that's a hallmark of humanity, not just the U.S. That's a human thing. That's not a border policy thing. That said, as I understand it, those policies are no longer in place. And so that is a positive improvement, positive change. I think that something has to be done. I agree to that extent with Michael that something has to be done that is more, it has to be more aggressive than what we've had, and still maintain the humanity of the people who are going through that process.
Yep. Yeah, I think one issue that one problem a lot of people had with the Trump plan, or at least what he said, was that he talked about, I don't think this is realistic. I think most people don't, and maybe most people didn't take him seriously. But he talked about like rounding up all of the illegal immigrants and sending them off. And I think, Kevin, what you're saying is, that's unacceptable.
Not unacceptable. What I found unacceptable in the Trump policy, and this is the historical policy, not what he plans on going ahead with. I don't know what he plans on going ahead with. I fear it a lot. But in the historical side of things, I mean, they were separating families and children. And once they were separated, there was no guarantee that they were going to be able to find themselves again or find their family again. That's unacceptable. That's unacceptable to separate a child, and I'm not talking teenagers, I'm talking children, from their parents. Even if it's just one of the parents, they should have been housed together. They should have been taken through the process together. That's a human perspective. That should not be a political pawn. The people, especially children, the children should not be political pawns in what the adults are playing with. As far as Trump's policy going forward and talking about rounding up and deporting the immigrants, that scares me, because there are far too many people in too many places who only see the color of someone's skin, and that immediately brands them one way or the other. And in the case of immigration, it's stereotypically brown skin, and anyone with brown skin immediately gets labeled as an immigrant. Add in, if they have an accent, that makes it even worse. I mean, we've seen it happen in profiling. We've seen it happen in multiple corners of the system, where people are, just because of the color of their skin, they're rounded up and they're deported. And
well, I think, Kevin, if I can add a little bit of perspective, I think it's different for border states, where all those states are pretty much bilingual. The view of people of minority status is really different when you've got 7-8 generations of that. minority in your state. So I think there is a little bit of difference between those two, and it's not a homogeneous population between what the Mexicans think and what the Guatemalans think and the Hondurans. They all have different views
Vastly
of this,
different cultures.
right?
Absolutely.
Vastly different cultures. So I think in states like mine, that's a little bit different. I hear people with accents all the time. I don't think anything differently. That's everyday normalcy in a state like ours. So, you know, in other places where there's not been an influx, I mean, let's think about where we all grew up. There was not a big Hispanic population where we grew up at all. There still isn't. So it was very different. And
I would hit pause on that, Mikey, and say that there's a reason there's a place called Mexican Town in the Detroit area.
but it was small.
It was not small. It was thousands of people. I won't say it's millions of people, but it was multiple thousands of people.
Right, but in a general scheme of where I look at large immigrant populations as a percentage basis, it wasn't as large here as obviously California and Arizona, Texas, where that's, you know, the border states, and there's been flow back and forth between the country. I mean, Arizona's only been a state since 1912. So, I mean, so people have been flowing back and forth here for forever. So there's a lot that can be done. I mean, I think we all agree on that. It's just, there's got to be a system created that we don't create chaos for the people that come. We don't create chaos for the communities that have to deal with the consequences of no one dealing with it, and create some level of border security so other harms that can be done to the nation, and it's real, can be stopped. So it's kind of, when I look at it, there's like three prongs to what this looks like at the end of the day. But what we've done to this point just was not a sustainable practice, because we don't have the infrastructure to absorb that many people.
You know, it'd be interesting, and this is kind of off on the side, but it would be interesting to see during the German, the French, the Irish, the Spanish influx. You know, throughout history, the history of the United States, we've had different populations emigrating to the United States in mass quantities. There was, you know, the people were railing against the Germans. There were a lot of people railing against the Italians, against the Irish. And so it would be interesting to me to see the comparison in numbers. And this isn't really it's not a political statement, Michael. That's an observational learning place. Learning, you know, are the numbers coming across the Mexico border proportionally that much higher than the numbers that were coming over from Ireland or Italy or Germany or right? And again, that's not political. I'm not making a statement politically there. I'm just making a statement from the perspective of, it'd be interesting to observe that.
And I think, but you can observe that with the other side of that coin. Was there a safety net for our families when they came over? And the answer was predominantly no. And was there chaos? You and I had talked about this before. Yes. So to me, we should have learned, at least from that, not to create chaos a second time or a third time. And what can we do to stop that, so that what our ancestors went through, Irish not need apply, Dagos and Wops, right? Stuff that my ancestors dealt with, right? They basically drove their way through it, right? And just, you know, just willed their path through it.
Yeah, if only we could learn from our history.
Yeah, right. I mean, to me, that was my biggest frustration, was, can't we learn from what we've done in the past and not repeat the same mistake and leave people hanging in places that isn't going to be beneficial to them or the community that takes them in. And obviously we haven't done that yet.
Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to kind of interject a related but different issue here. So, like I said, one of my priorities was, you know, the what I perceive as the over focus on identity or identity groups, with the Democrats. And so during the World Series, there was an ad, a Trump ad that aired, and it really caught my attention. And it was Kamala Harris. It was a clip of her, I don't know when, several years ago. It might have been before she was vice president even. She was being interviewed and talking about trans people and in relation to immigrants. So basically the long and short of it was, she said, yes, I agree with giving illegal immigrants who are in prison paying for their surgery, their trans surgery. So this introduces kind of the economic part of it, the border, immigration part of it, the identity part of it, a lot of things, So I don't know if you guys all saw that ad, but so she was agreeing to it, and I saw that and I thought, wow, I didn't realize she said that, and I thought immediately, okay, it's a campaign ad, it's got to be doctored somehow, so I'm looking forward to learning the truth about this, So during her interview on Fox News with Bret Baier, he asked her about that, and he even played the clip. He played the ad and said, yeah, do you, what's your response to this? And her response was something like, I'm going to follow the law. And he tried to push her a little bit and say, yeah, but, as president, you can kind of not necessarily set the law, but you can affect the law too. But she didn't take the opportunity to express herself any further. It was just that was the law, and I followed the law, and I think she said so did Donald Trump. Although apparently those things didn't happen while Trump was president, even though that was the law. Okay, so my point is, personally, that is something that concerns me. I'm all for, if someone wants to be a trans individual, that's fine. But I was really concerned over the past, I've become more and more concerned over the past several years that number one, it's happening with children. And, especially when it involves medical procedures, oftentimes irreversible medical procedures, results in sterilization in a lot of cases. And I realize that this isn't happening, there's not millions, this isn't happening to millions of people, but still, I think we're at the beginning, potentially at the beginning stages of this, and potentially this could become more and more common. So that is a concern. Number one, that it's the adults, it doesn't really bother me, but that it's happening with children. And number two, that a lot of these trans individuals, particularly trans women, are going into what someone would consider women's safe spaces, such as women's prisons, women's sports. Now, recently, there's a trans woman playing volleyball for the University of San Diego, maybe?
San Jose
State. Okay. And this is occurring right now. I really think, I'm surprised this isn't bigger news. But
I see it in the news almost every day.
Oh, you've been, okay, good. Yeah.
I see it in the news almost every day.
Okay.
Some reference to, usually it's an opponent forfeiting the game so that they don't have to play again.
That's the thing that to me is really interesting, is that a lot of the opponents, several schools, University of Nevada, University of Utah, I think, several others, have forfeited, said we are not going to play. So it was the female team members that got together and said, we are not going to play against this team because we think it's unfair that they have I guess you would say a biological male I don't know what the extent is of that person's conversion, but anyway, those female team members, are concerned enough that they don't want to participate in those games, and they're willing to forfeit. And to me, that's a really strong statement, and really important. And that is one thing that does concern me. I know this is a kind of a controversial topic, but I think it deserves a lot more discussion than we're getting. So I've talked about it long enough. Do you guys have any feelings about that?
So I'll wade into this one first off. And the first thing I wanted to do is go back to that ad that you mentioned about Harris supporting surgeries. And I did a factcheck.org check on it. And so when Harris was running as the presidential Democratic nomination in 2019,
primaries,
primaries, right? She was running to become the nominee. She answered an American Civil Liberties Union questionnaire supporting medically necessary gender affirming care for federal prisoners and immigrant detainees, including surgical care. Right? So what I hang my hat on, I do not want to pay taxes for a choice to become male or female from the opposite sex. I do believe that it is our responsibility when people are incarcerated, that if there is a medically necessary procedure to be done, that should be taken care of. And so based on the background on that, I would support medically necessary procedures, but not elective, right? And I think, as I understand it, the final procedure to finalize the transition from male to female or female to male is an elective procedure. You have to, it's not going to be something that's covered under insurance. It's something that you have to foot the bill for yourself. And so prisons should not be taking care of that. But if there are medically necessary procedures that are a part of the process, or that happen to be a part of the process, just because someone is incarcerated should not put their health, I'm going to use that in air quotes, in jeopardy. So that's the first part of that. And that, Danny, you continued on, and what was the second part of your
volleyball?
The volleyball.
Yeah.
This is an unusual instance of social conservatism on my part. I don't have an answer for it, but I do not believe that biological males or biological females should be competing against biological females when it's a biological male transitioning to female, or females transitioning to male should not be competing against males. There are physiological differences, physiological differences between the musculature and the build of the male human and the female human. And that would give, especially a male transitioning to female, an unfair advantage over competitors who are not also transitioning. So, I mean, the only thing that I can think is a fair way to do it is to have 3 leagues, men's, women's, and trans, where men transitioning to women compete against other men transitioning to women, and the same in the opposite, right? That's equal opportunity, right? I do believe that there are people who were assigned the wrong sex at birth and have a physical need to transition. I don't think it's something that should be done as a teenager. You cannot, and I'm experiencing this with my 18-year-old right now. You do not have the capacity to make decisions that are that big at that age, right? So I don't think that I think it should be. I think that their mental health should be addressed so that they are supported, but that a transition does not take place as a teenager or a preteen even, right? And in the universities where you do have some people who have already begun the transition process, the only fair thing to do is to have 3 leagues, and you have men, women, and trans.
Yeah. Well, so there, I mean, someday that might be a reality, but there aren't enough trans athletes now. So there would be at least a several year period where the decision has to be made. Are they allowed to? And that's where, it's a hard decision. I come down on, I'm sorry, but you can't compete at this level against these people.
But that was a change that was made to Title IX in the last year that the Biden administration did. And for me, after watching 50 years, right, this is the 50th anniversary of Title IX, to see the money finally flowing in, the television viewership flowing into women's sports for the first time in my life in scale, and each sport for different reasons, you finally see, at least at the university level, where women's sports are finally starting to at least catch up in those places where the sport can. Softball, basketball, some of the things that exist, women's sports are thriving from where they've been. I think that momentum will only continue. So for me, what I think is probably going to happen is I think there's going to be a revision on that policy in Title IX. And it's probably going to play out in the court stand. That's the way this thing always seems to work out, as it ends up in the court. And that's just it. It's I don't think women's sports should have to suffer. Why should they now have to suffer after making all the strides that they've done to this point? So that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm more in line with Kevin on this, which is, if that's what you want to do and you want to be an athlete, then we need to come up with a different solution, because the solution to just say, okay, I'm just going to join a women's league, well, that's not fair to all the women who work incredibly hard to be a Division I athlete. I'm lucky I had 2 kids that were Division I athletes. It's not easy. It's hard as heck to become one. And all you ask is, when you get there, is that you have an opportunity to compete at the level that, you came into. And when that level gets tilted, it creates an unnecessary mess. And to me, that's going to be interesting to see what happens with Title IX after the new administration, to see exactly what they do. But because I imagine that's going to be in the courts at some point.
Well, and to throw in a little bit of background on that, and obviously this is just a quick search on my part. This is dated back in April of this year, 2024, that the Biden administration did make changes to the Title IX regulation to reverse some rules implemented by Betsy DeVos, who was Trump's education secretary, to remove protections for students accused of sexual misconduct, right? So the administration reversed those protections for individuals accused of sexual misconduct. That's a whole separate issue. We could talk about that on another podcast. But what was absent from that, and it's called out specifically, is that there was no mention, there were no changes for transgender athletes. that the expectation was that they were supposed to be including rules to prevent schools from banning transgender athletes, but there was nothing in there.
Tied mostly, Kevin, to access to facilities, like going in a women's facility if you're transitioning. That's my understanding of why that rule change was made, was because
There was no
because
rule
of
change
that.
made. The only change to the Title IX regulations were related to the sexual misconduct. There were no protections added. There were no protections removed for transgender athletes. That's what I'm just giving that background, is that it was a non-entity. It didn't, what was advertised or what was reported never came to fruition.
So I'm going to let Renee jump in, and but that's something I think we should follow up on at some point, because I don't, I definitely don't know enough about that Title IX issue. So,
well, and I think we should also have a conversation, adding to the bullet point list. I think we should have a conversation about the media.
Media, okay.
Wait.
Okay, hang on. Renee.
Are we doing this for a
Go ahead,
week?
Renee.
Yeah. Renee hasn't gotten to speak on the trans topic.
Yeah.
If you want to, don't feel.
Sure. Again, working with, teens for the majority of my career, and some trans, some bi, some, all the initials. I keep going back to the fact that the human race is really still in kind of a toddler stage. I think Barbara Kingsolver might have said that in one of her books, and I thought, yeah, you know what? That's kind of true. We're still trying to figure things out, like way. It's beyond what any of us can really even think towards. What we're trying to figure out and how it's gonna, how things are going to evolve, and at this point in the game, if a team says collectively we're not gonna play that team because we don't think that this is fair, that's fine. Move on. And if other teams are going to say, yeah, I'll play, sure. Billie Jean King, I'll play you. Bobby Riggs. Remember that back in the day?
Oh yeah.
Okay, well, it's just something that I'm just watching. I'm not involved with it enough that I have somebody close to me who is fighting for some of those rights. I will certainly fight for the rights of each person to say, I'm not going to play against that person, or yes, I'm going to allow that person to play on the team, and we're going to see how this goes. Every single human body is so different from another in terms of testosterone and the hormone levels of progesterone, and male, female, all of it. If we watched the line in almost any sports, and we could see the line of where those progesterone levels are or testosterone levels are, then could we pick out, oh no, wait, that's a little too high on that end, and that's a little too. I just think it's I just watch it all and think, wow, we just have a lot to learn. And if I had to vote for something, to be done, I would say, yeah, go ahead and let people make the choice that they think they need to make at the time. Parents, if you think you need to make that decision, for your child, and I've seen this firsthand also, with a child who transitioned from a female to a male. She was probably middle schoolish when I met, and then is a very stable citizen, I guess, with a family that just loves and supports him at this point, and that's all good. I don't know. I know that sounds fairly simplistic, but honestly, to me, it really is that simplistic. I'm going to try to support my kid, get them. Yeah. But this goes back to, education again. Everything does, I think. People have to be able to have the education or have access to the education to be able to think critically about what it is that's being brought to them as a parent, as a neighbor, as a sister, as a brother. That doesn't come without a lot of support from the country. I think that anybody that thinks that a flower can grow without any kind of money, nurturing, attention from the bottom up, that again, I don't understand that kind of thinking. And we have a lot of people that in the country that haven't had that ability. They haven't had that brought to them, the ability to think, the ability to have enough food to grow, properly, to have the access to different educational means, etc. So anyway, that goes all the way around, but it does come back to, the thought of just thinking critically, and fairly objectively at the whole issue of LGBTQ. I mean, because that's all of it. Trans is in there as well, but that's just a little part of it. So.
Yeah. So we've been going for an hour and 12 minutes so far. So I'm going to try to maybe wrap it up. And so one thing I'm thinking we could do is kind of, I'm going to kind of state what I kind of hope happens from here. Maybe you could call it a little bit of advice or whatever, or a hope, or it's not a prediction. But there's two things. Number one, I want to give a lot of credit to Kamala Harris for accepting the results of the election and for congratulating Trump. And I assume she and probably Biden are going to be at the, what's it called?
Inauguration.
Inauguration. Thank you.
Inauguration.
I assume that I hope they're going to be there. And as far as I know, there have not been any riots. There have not been anything like that from the Democrat side in opposition to or in response to the results of the election. And I hope that continues into the inauguration. I mean, that's another hurdle that we're going to have to get past. Hopefully there won't be violence, during that time. But so far, I think the Democrats deserve a lot of credit. And I have to say, I think if things were reversed, it would be much different. I think if Trump had lost, he would not have accepted the results. He would not have congratulated Harris, and he would not be going to the inauguration.
Well, that in and of itself, Danny, defines the differences between conservative and liberal.
Well, no, I don't think that. I think that's Trump. Let me finish. Hang on. You're gonna have your moment. I don't think that's. I think that's Trump in particular. Okay. So
I think
the other thing I wanted to mention was I've been following an opinion writer for the New York Times his name is Ezra Klein, and he kind of gave some advice to the Democrats. He's a Democrat. And his thing is, for years, the Democrats, the response has been contempt towards a lot of Trump voters, contempt towards Trump, contempt for his supporters. And Ezra Klein believes that the appropriate response should be curiosity. You should try to learn who are these people? What motivates them? Why do they feel like they have to vote for someone like Trump, who Ezra Klein and others can't even imagine that someone might support someone like this. And I'm seeing this a lot now. A lot of people are expressing this. And I think it would really be in the Democrats' best interest and in everyone's best interest if they adopted an approach of curiosity rather than contempt. I've been talking with Trump supporters for years, and I feel like I can, again, like I said, I try not to judge the voter. I judge the candidate, and I can really empathize with why some people support Trump. And so that's my hope, is that the Democrats will adopt that approach. And I think if they do, it will make them much stronger and much more appealing in future. They have an opportunity here to really, I think, if they do some soul searching, to win in 2022, 2026 and 2028, etc. So that's my hope. So
the party out of power usually goes through upheaval. We see it all the time, right? It's just how far does the introspection go? I mean, Republicans went through this for 4 years. It's still not settled. I think the Democrats are going to go through the same thing the Republicans went through for the next 4 years. Don't know if it'll be settled by the time the next election comes around. Though the question I always have, Dan, does populism wane in 4 years? When his term's done and different candidates come into the system, and I would assume younger candidates come into the system, because we're not old yet, but we're heading that direction. But people more our age, more seasoned our way. Does that change? That's been my curiosity watching this from a non-emotional standpoint. Is we've had populism in the past. We're in the middle of populism now, but does that last? I don't know. I mean, that's going to be the interesting thing that happens after this 4 years of what do we go back to where it was pre-Obama, I'd say. I don't know. Part of me says, no, you probably can't put the genie back in the bottle. But part of me says that this is a cycle at the end of the day. And, when you go through things like pandemics, once in a century things, you go through upheavals. And I think at least what I've observed in the role that I play in my career is there are good people on both sides that want the right things and want to work together. There are those on the edges that will never happen. And you can't talk them into it, and you won't be able to. And that's just the reality of the situation. As I said, I have dear friends on both sides of the aisle who both were elected officials. And we see reality through pretty similar prisms. We may disagree on how we get there, but we see, I think, how you expect to deal with people through the same prism. And I hope that calms down. And Kevin, to your point about having a discussion on media, that's a big, right? That's a big conversation to have, because that plays into the emotional aspects, I think, of where some of the people sit right now is, where are they in that spectrum?
Oh, and I guess I don't completely disagree. but fundamentally am not in line with that. That my view on media is that it is entertainment and only entertainment. And that when you phrase or frame any news, anything, any broadcast, anything of any kind in the framework that it is specifically and solely designed to generate money for the media company releasing it, that changes what that media says or does. And so from that perspective, all of this conservative versus liberal media exchange, the CNN's bashing the Fox and the OAN bashing MSNBC or whatever, it's all about money. They're doing it out of a capitalistic prospect of making more money. It's entertainment. It is not news. Going back to the Walter Cronkites, okay, so we're talking a different era, right? And
Wow, you're old. You're old, Kevin.
What's that?
You're old.
I'll take it, right? I'll take it. I give me Walter Cronkite reading to me in a drone all day long over Anderson Cooper or any of this, right? It's entertainment. And it's particularly bad because there's so much of our population who has not opened their eyes to that revelation. And so as people hear, they're taking it for fact. They're taking, it was said on the news, so it's fact. And that's a problem. That's a big problem. I think, Renee, you mentioned something along the lines of people thinking for themselves. Can't do that if people are only going to allow themselves to be spoon-fed a line and not do the research, not do the background. If I've got something that I am particularly interested in, I am going to look first to the most conservative news source I can. Then I'm going to go to the most liberal news source I can, and then I'm going to find some place in the middle, which is harder and harder to find, right? Because somewhere among, as you coalesce those three stories together, you then get an understanding of, okay, so that's mostly what the truth is. It's still based on interpretation, right? And Danny, you cut me off on the conservative versus liberal. I'm not talking politics here. I'm talking about a liberal mindset as opposed to a conservative mindset. And there are differences in the definition. Conservatism is a reluctance to change. Liberalism is pretty much the opposite of that. It's open to new ideas. And that's a mindset. That's not Republican or Democrat or Libertarian or Green Party.
But conservatives have never reacted that way before Trump.
Define reacted that way.
To an election. There was never any election that was contested.
George W. Bush.
And that was contested equally by both sides because it was so close.
What you're describing is a measure on the scale as opposed to whether or not it was contested. Absolutely, it was contested. What's her Hillary Clinton? The election with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Absolutely, the Democrats went mad over it. So yeah, no, it wasn't Donald Trump. The election in 2020 was not the first time that it was contested. It was the first time it was contested to that extent, and it was the first time that a riot was incited to try and stop the elected process, the constitutional process from happening. Yes, that's the first time that happened, but it's not the first time it was contested.
That's the first time that a president, whether conservative or liberal, ever contested the results of the election to that extent. especially when he wasn't contesting the closeness of it as Gore and Bush were, and hanging Chads and all this. He was contesting the entire system. He wanted to disrupt the entire system. And what I'm saying is that is not that's actually the opposite of conservative.
But that's
He
also
was
not.
he was willing to burn the system down in
That's
order
also
to.
not what I'm
Okay, so
referring to as I talk to that. Right.
Okay,
So as
so
I
you
talk
and I,
to them,
we're talking about
it's-
different things. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
that it is in a liberal mindset more likely to accept change. In this case, the election going for Donald Trump as opposed to Kamala Harris, than it is in a conservative mindset, which is structured to resist change more frequently than not.
Yeah, but not in that.
Nah.
Not in that vein. Listen, liberalism isn't even what the far left is. It's progressivism. Let's be honest. It's not liberalism in the truest sense of what I consider, because I know people that are Republicans that are liberal.
Well, again, Michael, you're referring to politics, and I'm not.
But
I'm not talking
but you are in the sense saying that conservatives were more likely to raise hell over a contested election. When was it conservatives, or was it a different brand from the right side, like a progressives, or a different brand of the left side? I tend to think it's more of that, Kevin, than what you would say what was a conservative and what isn't. Conservatives, yes.
So here's the twist, Mikey. Here's the twist, right? Those individuals that you refer to as progressives, right? That extreme on the what we would call on the left side of the American political spectrum. They are every bit as conservative in their mindset as the farthest right.
But I'm not talking. We're talking about.
We're talking. That's why I'm saying that you're talking about something different, and you're talking politics. I'm not talking about that.
But
the people on the far left are every bit as conservative to their views, meaning they are unwilling to change their mindset, as the far right is unwilling to change their mindset.
But
right?
I just think there's a more nuance. There's a more nuance to the term, Kevin. As far as that's my point. Liberalism and conservatism are more nuanced now than where I think they've ever been in the history of this country. Of who considers themselves a liberal, a true liberal, or who considers himself what they consider a true conservative. Right? I've got friends here, right, that were friends with John McCain. Okay. I know exactly how they feel and what they feel conservatism is. I have friends who are further to the right of that, and they have a view of whether they're a conservative or not, or whether there's something else. It's just back to trying to figure out the electorate and where people are from a mindset, Kevin. I think that's just a little too broad.
So again, I go back to, Michael, you're referring more to a political spectrum, and I'm referring more to a psychosociological spectrum.
So am I, Kevin.
Okay, so let's take that'll be another topic in addition to media and everything else. So, but Renee, do you have any closing comments? Or not? It's,
No, I think I was going to mention earlier something about, at different points over the decades, I've thought about the checks and balances, system that we have set up. And again, I can't speak to decades ago. When I was in my 20s or 30s and what I was thinking compared to now, but it just seems like that's something to really take a look at the, are people really, who are in office taking this seriously, or are we playing games again? And I just keep going back to the is this really happening kind of thing when I watch the game playing. So I don't know. I guess the topic of where are we in the country? I guess it just goes back to Dan, like you've continued to talk about communication. How do we communicate, with each other? And when we're in these lofty positions, as Congress people, and what are they doing? Are they capable of thinking maturely, objectively, to be able to take our system of checks and balances, to a point where we're not playing games? I don't know. That's way too big, and but that really is where my head goes when I watch a lot of what's going on. And, the little conversations and this and that. We're going to argue about philosophies and, different types of rights for people. But, when it gets right down to it, can we act in a way that we really can take all of these ideas and really carefully talk about them honestly, openly, listen, and come up with anything that can move ourselves forward, instead of backward. It just seems like we've been spinning wheels for a long, long time. And yes, there has been progress made for sure. And yet there are people that, come by right away and then they'll say, I'm just going to take that right down. I'm taking that out of the system. This is okay now. This is fair now. This is what, we can expect now. I don't know. I'm starting to just.
Well, I think if when a politician like that comes around, I think we would probably all of us would agree it's like that's the type of person we want, someone who is willing to have conversations with, across the aisle. And I think that from what I've heard, that has really reduced in Washington, D.C. There used to be bipartisan, official and unofficial, on the record, off the record, they would get together, and nowadays, from what I've heard, that's very uncommon. But anyway, let's end it here, and then hopefully do it again sometime soon. And if anyone else wants to join, let me know. And I'm going to end the stream, but you guys stick on for a couple minutes, okay? Because I want to talk about what to do with this. So just
I'm going to go get a drink.
Yeah, sounds good. Bye. Thanks.
I'll be right back.